The winter of 1884 arrived earlier than anyone in Frost Creek had expected. The cold came like an enemy, covering the Rocky Mountains. With endless layers of snow and turning familiar paths into dangerous white deserts, the tall pine trees stood frozen beneath the gray sky, their branches heavy with ice. Travelers who entered those mountains often disappeared, leaving behind only broken trails and forgotten memories. Deep inside the frozen wilderness, far away from crowded towns and busy roads, stood a small blacksmith forge surrounded by endless forests. The forge belonged to Elias Boone, a man whose name was respected throughout the frontier. His hands could shape the hardest iron into tools, horseshoes and weapons with incredible precision. But while people admired his skill, they feared his silence. Elias was a man of few words. He rarely visited the nearby villages, never joined celebrations, and avoided every conversation that lasted longer than a few seconds. The people of Frost Creek often whispered about him. Some said he had lost everything years ago. Others believed he was hiding from a painful past. But no one truly knew the truth. Every morning before the first light touched the mountains, Elias entered his forge. The orange glow of burning coal reflected against his cold expression as his heavy hammer struck the hot metal again and again. Clang, clang, clang. The sound traveled through the valley like a lonely song. His only companions were his old black horse, a wooden cabin beside the forge, and the endless mountains surrounding him. Elias believed he needed nothing else. The world had taken enough from him, and he had accepted a life of solitude. But on one freezing evening, everything changed. A powerful snowstorm attacked the valley without warning. The wind screamed between the trees, shaking the walls of Elias's cabin. Snow covered the windows, and the entire mountain disappeared behind a curtain of white. Elias had just finished closing his forge when he heard something unusual, a faint sound. Wood cracking, wheels struggling. Someone fighting against the storm. He stepped outside and looked into the darkness. Through the heavy snowfall, he saw the shape of a broken wagon slowly moving toward his property. One wheel was almost destroyed, and the horses could barely continue. Beside the wagon stood a young woman wearing a damaged brown coat. Her face was pale from exhaustion, and her hands were red from the freezing air. Holding tightly to her arm was a small boy, no older than 10 years. His clothes were thin, and fear filled his eyes. The woman looked at Elias with desperation. "We don't have money," she said quietly. "But please, if you repair our wagon, I will work until the debt is paid." Elias said nothing. For a moment, only the sound of the storm filled the valley. Then his eyes moved toward the frightened child. Something inside him changed. Without speaking a single word, Elias turned back toward his forge, picked up his heavy blacksmith hammer, and walked toward the broken wagon. Neither the woman nor the boy knew it yet, but that small act of kindness would open the door to a past Elias had spent years trying to forget. The storm continued to attack the valley with unstoppable force. Snow covered the ground so quickly that within minutes, the wagon tracks disappeared completely. The mountains seemed alive, roaring with freezing winds that could break even the strongest person's courage. Inside the forge, the flames burned brightly as Elias Boone examined the damaged wagon wheel. The young woman stood near the entrance, holding her son close while trying to protect him from the cold. She watched silently as the mysterious blacksmith worked. His movements were calm and controlled. Every strike of his hammer showed years of experience. The woman had expected anger or rejection. After all, they had arrived at a stranger's home during the worst storm of the winter, asking for help without a single coin to offer. But Elias never complained. He simply worked. After several minutes of silence, the young boy finally spoke. "Are you always this quiet?" The question surprised his mother. She quickly looked at her son and whispered, "Thomas, don't bother him." But Elias stopped for a moment. He looked at the boy. Then he looked back at the broken wheel. "No," Elias finally answered. The boy's eyes widened. It was the first word he had heard from the blacksmith. "What happened?" Thomas asked. The woman immediately became nervous. She knew her son had a habit of asking too many questions, especially with strangers. But Elias did not become angry. He only lowered his eyes and continued working. "Life happened," he replied. The simple answer created a strange silence. The boy looked confused, but his mother understood there was a painful story hidden behind those words. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She and her son had been traveling west for nearly 3 weeks, searching for a new beginning after losing everything they owned. Her husband, a railway worker, had died months earlier during an accident, leaving Clara alone to raise their child. The little money they had saved was stolen by thieves on the road. Their horse became sick. Then the storm arrived. By the time they reached Frost Creek, they had nowhere else to go. Elias finished repairing the wheels several hours later. He tested the wagon carefully, making sure it could survive the dangerous mountain roads. Clara stepped forward. "Thank you," she said softly. "I promise I will repay you." Elias nodded once. "You need shelter tonight." Clara looked surprised. "We cannot ask for more." "You aren't asking," Elias answered. He pointed toward the small cabin beside the forge. The cabin was simple, with old wooden walls and a small fireplace. It was not comfortable, but it was warm. Clara hesitated. For years, Elias had lived alone. He had built walls around himself stronger than any iron he had ever forged. But that night, something unusual happened. A lonely cabin that had known only silence suddenly held the sound of another voice, the sound of a child laughing. And Elias Boone, the man who believed he would spend the rest of his life alone, began to realize that the storm had not only brought strangers to his door, it had brought a piece of his forgotten past back into his life. The morning after the storm arrived quietly. For the first time in many years, Elias Boone woke up to a sound that did not belong to the mountains. A voice, a child's voice. Thomas was outside the cabin, trying to clear snow from the path with a small wooden shovel he had found near the door. His cheeks were red from the cold, but his face carried a happiness that Elias had not seen in a long time. Elias stood near the window and watched him silently. The sight felt strange. His cabin had always been a place of silence. Every chair, every wooden table, and every corner carried memories of a life he had chosen to leave behind. But now the sound of footsteps moved through the rooms, and the smell of fresh firewood filled the air. For reasons he did not understand, the loneliness that had surrounded him for years felt weaker. Inside the cabin, Clara prepared a simple breakfast using the small amount of food she had left. She noticed Elias standing near the doorway. "You should eat with us," she said. Elias looked surprised. "I have work." "You repaired our wagon in the middle of a storm," Clara replied. "I think you can spare 10 minutes. For a moment, Elias almost refused. That was what he had always done. Keep distance. Avoid attachments. Forget the past. But then he looked at Thomas, sitting at the table, waiting patiently. Elias finally sat down. The breakfast was quiet, but it was not uncomfortable. It was different. After eating, Thomas noticed something hanging on the wall above the fireplace. An old metal pendant. It was shaped like a mountain eagle and looked older than anything else in the cabin. "Is that yours?" Thomas asked. Elias immediately looked toward it. His expression changed. "Yes." "Who gave it to you?" The room became silent. Clara noticed the change in Elias's face and gently touched her son's shoulder. "Thomas." But Elias did not get angry. Instead, he slowly stood up and walked toward the pendant. "My father made it." Thomas looked interested. "He was a blacksmith too?" Elias nodded. "He taught me everything I know." The boy smiled. "Then he must have been a good man." Elias stared at the pendant. He was. Those 2 words carried years of pain. Clara noticed something unusual. The way Elias spoke about his father was not like someone remembering a simple family member. It was like remembering someone he had lost recently, even though many years had passed. Later that afternoon, while Elias worked in the forge, Clara helped repair some damaged clothes. She looked around the property and noticed something strange. Near the back of the cabin was an old wooden box buried partially beneath the snow. A name was carved into the top. Jonathan Boone, Elias's father. When Clara mentioned the box, Elias suddenly became quiet. "You shouldn't touch that." His voice was not angry. It was afraid. Clara looked at him carefully. What is inside? Elias stared at the frozen mountains beyond the trees. Something I spent 20 years trying to forget. Before Clara could ask another question, a distant sound echoed through the valley. A horse. Then another. Someone was approaching. Elias immediately grabbed his rifle. The peaceful morning disappeared, because whoever was coming through the snow was not a lost traveler. Elias knew that sound, and he knew the past he had buried was finally coming back to find him. The sound of approaching horses grew louder with every passing second. Elias Boone stood frozen beside the forge, his hand tightly gripping the old rifle he kept hidden beneath the wooden table. The peaceful silence that had filled the valley only moments earlier was gone. The mountains were warning him. Someone was coming. Clara noticed the sudden change in his expression. The man who had quietly repaired their wagon, who had given them shelter without asking for anything in return, now looked like someone preparing for a battle. "Who are they?" she asked softly. Elias did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on the white trail between the pine trees. Thomas stepped closer to the window. "Are they friends?" Elias looked at the boy. "No." The single word carried enough fear to make Clara understand. These were not ordinary travelers. The riders appeared through the heavy snowfall a few moments later. 3 men on dark horses slowly entered the valley. Their coats were covered with snow, and their faces were hidden beneath wide hats. The man leading them had a long scar across his left cheek. Elias recognized him immediately. His name was Caleb Voss. 20 years earlier, Caleb had been part of a group of men who had changed Elias's life forever. The rider stopped his horse near the forge. "Elias Boone!" Caleb called out. His voice echoed through the frozen valley. "I never thought I would find you hiding here." Clara looked at Elias in confusion. Hiding. The word stayed in her mind. Elias stepped outside, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. "What do you want, Caleb?" The scarred man smiled. "Still pretending you don't know?" Snow fell between them. For years, Elias had tried to bury the memories of his younger days. He had built this isolated life because he believed the past could never reach him. But Caleb Voss had proven him wrong. "You owe me something," Caleb said. "I owe you nothing." Caleb laughed quietly. Your father would have disagreed. At the mention of Jonathan Boone, Elias's expression hardened. "Do not speak about my father." Caleb moved closer. "Then tell me where the journal is." The words shocked Elias. Clara listened carefully. "Journal? What journal?" Elias said nothing. Caleb looked toward the cabin. Then he noticed Clara and Thomas standing inside. His smile disappeared. "I see you've made yourself comfortable." Elias stepped forward. "They have nothing to do with this." Caleb looked back at him. "Everyone connected to you eventually becomes part of this." The threat was clear. Elias raised his rifle slightly. The other 2 riders reached for their weapons. For several seconds nobody moved. The entire valley felt like it was holding its breath. Finally, Caleb pulled back on his horse. "We will return tomorrow." He looked directly at Elias. "And when we do, you will give us what your father hid." The riders turned and disappeared into the snowy forest. After they were gone, Clara walked outside. She looked at Elias with questions in her eyes. "What was your father hiding?" Elias stared at the place where the riders had vanished. For a long time he said nothing. Then he quietly replied, "A truth that was never meant to be found." That night, while the storm returned outside, Elias opened the old wooden box he had kept buried for 20 years. Inside was a worn leather journal, and on the first page were words written by his father. "If this book is ever found, it means they have returned." Elias turned the page slowly, and for the first time in decades, he was forced to remember the night everything was taken from him. Outside the cabin, the wind moved through the frozen pine trees, creating a sound that reminded him of distant voices. The fire inside the room burned low, but Elias barely noticed the cold. His attention was fixed on the old leather journal lying on the wooden table, a journal he had refused to open for 2 decades. Clara and Thomas sat quietly near the fireplace. They could feel that whatever was written inside, those worn pages carried a heavy weight. Elias slowly opened the cover. The leather cracked from age. The first page contained only one sentence written in his father's handwriting. "If this book is ever found, it means they have returned." Elias closed his eyes. Those words brought back memories he had spent years trying to bury. He remembered being a young man, standing beside his father Jonathan Boone in the same forge. Back then the valley was not lonely. The forge was always filled with the sounds of horses, travelers and neighbors seeking help. Jonathan was more than a blacksmith. He was a man people trusted. But Elias remembered another side of his father. The secrets, the late-night visitors, the hidden conversations. One winter night, 20 years earlier, Jonathan had disappeared into the mountains with a group of men following him. He returned hours later with a wounded shoulder and a small leather journal in his hand. He told Elias only one thing: some truths are dangerous enough to kill for. The next morning, Jonathan was gone. Forever! The official story was that he died in a mountain accident, but Elias never believed it. He turned the pages of the journal carefully. Most of the entries were about locations, names, and strange symbols. His father had written about a hidden mine deep inside the Rocky Mountains, a place that was never marked on any map, a place containing something powerful enough to make men betray their own families. Clara leaned closer. "What did your father find?" Elias continued reading. The next page contained a list of names. At the bottom was one name he recognized: Caleb Voss, the same man who had arrived at the forge that day. Elias's hand tightened around the journal. He was involved. Clara looked confused. Involved in what? Elias remained silent. Then he turned another page. His father had written, "The men of the Black Mountain Company are not searching for gold. Gold is only what they want people to believe." Elias stopped reading. The room became completely silent. Thomas looked at him. "Then what are they searching for?" Elias looked toward the dark window. For years, he had convinced himself that his father's secrets belonged to the past. But Caleb's return proved the past was alive. "They are searching for something my father protected." "What?" Elias slowly closed the journal. "I don't know." A sudden noise interrupted them. A stone struck the cabin window. Everyone froze. Elias grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door. Outside in the snow was a small wooden box. No footprints, no sign of anyone nearby. Only a message carved into the wood. Elias Boone, some debts cannot be forgotten. Inside the box was an old photograph, a photograph of Jonathan Boone. But he was not alone. Standing beside him was a young woman Elias had never seen before. And on the back of the photograph were 5 words. She survived the night. Elias stared at the message, because according to everything he knew, that night nobody had survived. The cabin remained silent after Elias discovered the photograph. The fire continued burning, but the warmth inside the room could not remove the cold feeling that had entered his heart. He held the old picture in his hands, staring at the faces captured in time. His father, Jonathan Boone, and beside him, a woman Elias had never seen before. Her expression was calm, but there was something familiar about her eyes, something that made Elias feel as if he had seen that same look somewhere long ago. Clara noticed the confusion on his face. "Do you know who she is?" Elias slowly shook his head. "No, but you said nobody survived that night." Elias looked at the photograph again. "That's what I was told." The words were difficult for him to say. For 20 years, Elias had believed he knew the truth about his father's final days. He believed Jonathan had been killed because he discovered something dangerous. But this photograph changed everything. Someone had survived, someone who knew what really happened. Thomas carefully stepped closer. "Maybe she can tell you what happened to your father." Elias looked at the boy. The innocence in Thomas's voice reminded him of a time when he also believed every mystery had an answer. But the mountains had taught him something different. Some secrets were buried because people wanted them forgotten. That night, Elias studied every detail of the photograph. The woman wore a small silver necklace around her neck. Behind her and Jonathan was a wooden building that looked abandoned. Elias recognized the location. His breathing stopped. "The old mining station." Clara looked at him. "What is it?" "A place where my father used to work before he became a blacksmith." Elias had not thought about that place for years. The mining station had been closed after a mysterious accident. Many workers disappeared, and the company abandoned the entire area. But now he understood. The photograph was not just a memory. It was a message. Someone wanted him to go there. The next morning, Elias prepared his horse and supplies. Clara watched him carefully. "You are going after the woman?" Elias nodded. "If she survived, she knows the truth." "And Caleb Voss?" Elias loaded his rifle. "He knows she survived too." Clara became worried. "Then you cannot go alone." Elias turned toward her. "This has nothing to do with you." "Maybe not," Clara replied. "But you saved our lives, and now someone is trying to destroy yours." Elias said nothing. For years, he had lived by one rule: never trust anyone, never depend on anyone. But Clara and Thomas had already broken through the walls he had built around himself. Before leaving, Elias looked at Thomas. "Stay here." The boy frowned. "I can help. You are 10 years old. I survived 3 weeks on the road." Elias almost smiled. "Almost. That doesn't make you a mountain man." Thomas looked disappointed, but then Elias placed a small wooden handle in his hand. It was a tiny blacksmith hammer. "My father gave me this when I was your age." Thomas looked surprised. "Why are you giving it to me?" Elias looked toward the mountains. "Because sometimes the smallest things remind us who we are." Then Elias climbed onto his horse and disappeared into the snowy forest. He followed the old trail toward the abandoned mining station. But he did not know that someone was already waiting there. Someone who had been hiding for 20 years. Someone who knew the real story of Jonathan Boone. And someone who had been waiting for Elias to return. The journey through the mountains was harder than Elias remembered. The old trail that once carried miners, travelers, and supply wagons had almost disappeared beneath years of snow and neglect. Tall pine trees surrounded him from every direction, their frozen branches reaching across the path like twisted hands. Elias moved slowly through the wilderness, following the memories of his childhood. Every mountain had a story. Every frozen valley carried a forgotten name, and every step toward the abandoned mining station brought him closer to the truth he had spent 20 years avoiding. By sunset, Elias finally reached the old mining area. The place looked exactly as he remembered. Broken wooden buildings stood silently beneath the snow. Rusted tools were scattered across the ground. The old mine entrance was covered with fallen rocks, as if the mountain itself had tried to hide what was buried inside. Elias climbed down from his horse and approached the main building, the old company office, the place where his father had discovered something that changed everything. The wooden door was damaged but still locked. Elias removed his tools and forced it open. Inside, dust covered every surface. Old papers were scattered across the floor, and broken furniture surrounded the empty room. But someone had been there recently. A candle was still burning. Elias immediately reached for his rifle. "Show yourself." For several seconds there was only silence. Then a voice came from the corner. "You have your father's eyes." Elias turned quickly. Standing in the shadows was an elderly woman wearing a dark coat. Her hair was gray, but her eyes were sharp and full of memories. The same eyes from the photograph. Elias froze. "Who are you?" The woman slowly stepped forward. "My name is Margaret Hale." The name meant nothing to Elias, but the photograph meant everything. "You knew my father." Margaret looked at the old office around them. "I knew Jonathan Boone better than anyone." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. "Why didn't I know about you?" The woman's expression became painful. "Because your father wanted you to believe I was dead." The answer shocked him. "Why?" Margaret walked toward an old wooden desk. "Because the men who killed your father were searching for me." Elias felt anger rising inside him. "My father wasn't killed in an accident." Margaret looked directly at him. "No." Her voice became quiet. "He was murdered." The words hit Elias harder than the freezing wind outside. For 20 years, he had carried the pain of losing his father. But he had never allowed himself to believe someone had taken Jonathan's life. Margaret opened a hidden compartment inside the desk and removed a small metal box. "Your father left this for you." Elias stared at it. "Why didn't he give it to me himself?" Margaret looked down. because he knew he would not survive that night. Inside the box was a strange metal symbol and a map of the mountains. But there was something else, a letter. Elias recognized the handwriting immediately. His father's handwriting. His hands began to shake as he opened it. The first line said, "My son, if you are reading this, then I failed to protect you from the truth." Elias continued reading, and with every word, the life he thought he understood began falling apart. Because Jonathan Boone had not been hiding from danger, he had been protecting Elias from it. And the people who wanted the secret were much closer than he ever imagined. The old mining office felt colder than the mountains outside. Elias Boone stood completely still, holding the letter written by his father. The paper was old and fragile, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Jonathan Boone, a man Elias had spent 20 years trying to forget. A man whose death had shaped every decision Elias had made. His fingers trembled slightly as he continued reading. "My son, if you are reading this, then I failed to protect you from the truth." Elias stopped. Those words carried the weight of a goodbye. He continued, "I know you will search for answers. That is who you are. You have always carried the same stubborn heart as your mother and the same courage I tried to teach you." Elias lowered his eyes. His mother, a memory he rarely allowed himself to visit. She had died when he was young, leaving only Elias and his father behind. Jonathan had raised him alone, teaching him the blacksmith trade and the importance of honesty. But now this letter revealed there had been another life, another secret. The men who came to Frost Creek are not ordinary criminals. They belong to a group called the Black Mountain Company. They control powerful men, officials, and businesses across the frontier. They are not searching for gold. They are searching for the truth hidden beneath the mountain. Elias looked at Margaret. "What truth?" The old woman remained silent. "Your father believed the mountain contained evidence of their crimes," she finally said. Elias looked back at the letter. The next words made his heart stop. "The evidence is protected by a symbol only our family knows." Elias looked at the strange metal piece inside the box. The mountain eagle. The same symbol from his father's pendant. The eagle must never fall into their hands. If they find it, they will destroy everything. A sudden noise came from outside. Horse footsteps. Margaret's expression changed instantly. "They found us." Elias quickly folded the letter and placed it inside his coat. "How?" Margaret looked toward the window.
"Caleb Voss has been searching for this place for years."
Elias moved toward the door. This time he was not afraid. He was angry. Outside, 3 riders appeared through the snow. Caleb Voss had returned, but this time he was not coming to threaten Elias. He was coming to take what belonged to Jonathan Boone. "Elias!" Caleb shouted from outside. "You know this won't end well." Elias stepped outside with his rifle. "You murdered my father." The scar on Caleb's face seemed darker beneath the winter sky. "Your father chose his fate." The words confirmed everything. For 20 years, Elias had wondered if he had been wrong. Now he knew. Caleb Voss was responsible. The 2 men stared at each other across the frozen ground. "You should have stayed hidden, Boone," Caleb said. Elias raised his rifle. "And you should have stayed buried with the past." For a moment, nobody moved. Then a gunshot exploded through the valley. The battle for Jonathan Boone's secret had begun, but neither side knew that the biggest danger was not the men standing outside. It was what was hidden beneath the mountain. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the mountains. For a few seconds, everything became silent. Then the valley exploded into movement. Elias quickly moved behind the wooden wall of the old mining office as bullets struck the frozen ground around him. Snow flew into the air while Caleb, Voss and his men took cover behind the abandoned buildings. Margaret remained inside, protecting the metal box that contained Jonathan Boone's final secret. "Elias!" she shouted. "They cannot get that box!" Elias looked back at her. They won't. He had spent 20 years running from the past, but now the past had found him. And he was no longer the same young man who lost his father. He was a man who had something to protect. Outside, Caleb moved carefully between the buildings. "You know you cannot win," he shouted. Elias stayed silent. Caleb continued. Your father thought he could expose us. He believed truth was stronger than power. A cold expression crossed Elias's face. My father was right. Caleb laughed. No, Boone, your father was a fool. Those words were enough. Elias raised his rifle. But before he could fire, another shot came from a different direction. Everyone stopped. The sound had not come from Elias. Someone else was there. A fourth person. Caleb's men looked around nervously. Margaret whispered, "He has found us." Elias looked at her. "Who?" Before she could answer, a figure appeared on the snowy hill above the station. A man wearing a long black coat stood watching them. Caleb immediately recognized him. His face changed. Impossible. The stranger slowly walked down the hill. "I thought you would be pleased to see me, Caleb." Caleb stepped backward. Because the man standing before him was someone he believed had died years ago. Margaret looked at Elias. That is the man who knows the entire truth. Elias watched carefully. The stranger reached the old office and looked directly at him. "My name is Daniel Crow." Elias lowered his rifle slightly. "What do you want?" Daniel looked toward the mountains. "The same thing your father wanted." "The truth." The word felt heavier than before. Daniel explained that Jonathan Boone had discovered a hidden record inside the mountain. It contained proof that the Black Mountain Company had been responsible for disappearances, murders, and illegal operations across the frontier. But before Jonathan could reveal the evidence, Caleb Voss attacked him. The only reason the truth survived was because Jonathan trusted a few people. Margaret, Daniel, and now Elias. Suddenly, one of Caleb's men fired toward Daniel. The stranger moved quickly and disappeared behind a wooden structure. The fight started again, but this time Caleb's confidence was gone, because he knew something Elias did not. The mountain secret was not just about crimes. It was about a hidden treasure that powerful men had killed for. And somewhere beneath the frozen earth, the final piece of Jonathan Boone's mystery was still waiting. The battle at the abandoned mining station continued beneath the gray winter sky. Snow covered the ground, hiding footprints and empty bullet shells. The once forgotten mining camp had become the center of a fight that had been waiting 20 years to happen. Elias Boone stood beside Daniel Crow, watching Caleb Voss and his men carefully. Something had changed. A few minutes earlier, Caleb had been confident. He believed he had finally cornered Elias and taken control of Jonathan, Boone's secret. But now fear had appeared in his eyes, because Daniel Crow was alive, and Daniel knew everything. "Who are you really?" Elias asked. Daniel looked at him quietly. "Someone your father trusted." The answer was not enough. Elias had spent his entire life surrounded by unanswered questions. Every person connected to his father seemed to carry another hidden piece of the truth. Margaret stepped forward. Daniel was one of the miners who discovered what was inside the mountain. Elias looked toward the abandoned mine. What was inside? Daniel glanced at the frozen entrance. Something that should never have been found. The words created silence. For years, people believed the Black Mountain Company was searching for gold. But Jonathan Boone had written that gold was only a distraction. Daniel explained that deep beneath the mountain was an old underground chamber created decades earlier by miners. Inside that chamber were records, documents, and evidence proving that powerful men had committed terrible crimes across the frontier. Names, dates, payments, everything. If those records reached the public, the Black Mountain Company would collapse. "And your father discovered it," Daniel said. Elias looked down. "Then why didn't he reveal it?" Daniel's expression became painful. "Because he knew they would kill everyone connected to him." The truth hurt more than Elias expected. His father had not abandoned him. He had sacrificed himself to protect him. Suddenly a loud explosion shook the mountain. Everyone turned toward the mine entrance. Caleb smiled. "You are all too late." Smoke rose from the old mining tunnel. One of Caleb's men had placed explosives near the entrance. "He is destroying the evidence," Margaret said. Elias immediately moved forward. "No." Daniel grabbed his arm. "That tunnel is unstable." "My father died protecting that secret." Elias looked toward the mountain. "I won't let them bury it forever." Before anyone could stop him, Elias entered the dark tunnel. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. The walls shook from the explosion, and pieces of rock fell from above. He moved deeper into the mountain, carrying only a lantern and his rifle. The deeper he went, the more he saw signs of the past, old mining tools, broken wooden supports, messages carved into the stone. Then he reached a hidden chamber. In the center of the room was a large iron box. The same symbol was carved on its surface, the mountain eagle. Elias slowly approached. He knew this was what everyone had been fighting for, the secret his father died protecting. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of documents, but beneath them was something unexpected, a small handwritten letter. Not from Jonathan, from someone else. Someone who knew Elias would eventually find this place. The first line made his blood run cold. Elias Boone, if you are reading this, your father was not the only Boone who survived that night. Elias stared at the words, because they revealed a truth he never imagined. His family had another secret, and someone from his past was still alive. The words on the letter refused to leave Elias Boone's mind. Elias Boone, if you are reading this, your father was not the only Boone who survived that night. He read the sentence again. Then again, his hands tightened around the old paper. For 20 years, Elias had believed his family had been reduced to one person, himself. His father was gone. His mother was gone. Everyone he loved had disappeared. But now, hidden beneath a mountain, he had discovered a truth that changed everything. Someone from his family was alive. The lantern in his hand flickered as the cold wind moved through the underground chamber. Elias looked around the hidden room, searching for another clue. The iron box contained many documents, but one item caught his attention. A small wooden pendant. It was almost identical to the one his father had worn. The mountain eagle, but this one had a different mark carved into the back. A single letter. Elias stared at it. He had never seen that mark before. He carefully opened the letter again. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Jonathan asked me to hide this message until the day his son discovered the truth. If you are reading this, then the Black Mountain Company has returned. Elias continued. My name is Rebecca Boone. His breathing stopped. Rebecca. The name sounded like a distant memory, a name he had heard once when he was a child, but never understood. I am your older sister. The word seemed impossible. Elias stepped back. His father had never told him he had a sister. Not once. The letter continued. Your father believed keeping us apart was the only way to keep us alive. After the attack on our family, he sent me away with trusted friends. He told me that one day when the danger was gone, we would be reunited. Elias lowered the letter, but the danger never ended. Instead, his father died, and Elias spent years alone. A sudden sound came from outside the chamber. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. Elias quickly grabbed the documents and hid the letter inside his coat. He turned toward the entrance. A shadow appeared. For a moment, he thought it was Caleb, but it was not. A woman stepped into the chamber. She was older, wearing a dark traveling coat covered in snow. Her eyes immediately moved toward the mountain eagle symbol in Elias's hand. Neither of them spoke. Then the woman whispered, You found it. Elias raised his rifle. Who are you? The woman looked at him for several seconds. Then tears appeared in her eyes. My name is Rebecca Boone. The world around Elias seemed to disappear. The woman standing in front of him was the answer to a question he had never known to ask. His sister, the person his father had hidden from him. Before Elias could speak, a loud sound echoed through the tunnel. The mountain was collapsing. Rebecca looked toward the entrance. We have to leave. Elias looked at her. Not until you tell me the truth. Rebecca's expression became serious. Then you need to know something. What? She looked directly into his eyes. Your father did not die trying to protect the secret. A pause filled the chamber. He died trying to protect you from the man who betrayed him. Elias felt a chill stronger than the freezing mountain air. Who betrayed him? Rebecca slowly answered, The person you trusted the most. And somewhere above them, Caleb Voss smiled, because he knew Elias was about to discover the final betrayal. The underground chamber shook violently. Small pieces of rock fell from the ceiling as the mountain groaned around Elias Boone and Rebecca. The air was filled with dust, and the sound of collapsing tunnels echoed through the darkness. But Elias barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing. The person I trusted the most? The question left his mouth slowly. Rebecca looked away. She knew the answer would hurt him. For 20 years, Elias had carried the pain of losing his father. He had blamed the mountains, the storm, and the unknown enemies who came after Jonathan Boone. But he had never imagined that someone close to his family had been responsible. "Tell me," Elias demanded. Rebecca remained silent for a moment. Then she spoke. "Your father's closest friend." Elias froze. A memory appeared in his mind. One name. A man who had been around his family when he was a child. A man his father trusted. Samuel Carter. Rebecca nodded. Yes. The name struck Elias like a blow. Samuel Carter had been more than a friend. He had been like an uncle to Elias. He had taught him how to ride horses, how to survive in the wilderness, and how to defend himself. When Jonathan disappeared, Samuel was the man who told Elias the official story. The accident, the mountain fall, the lie. Samuel knew everything, Rebecca said. He knew about the hidden chamber. He knew about the documents. He knew your father was trying to expose the Black Mountain Company. Elias looked down at the papers in his hand. Then why did he betray him? Rebecca's eyes filled with sadness.
Because he wanted power.
The answer was simple, but painful. Samuel had believed that controlling the evidence would make him one of the most powerful men in the frontier. He joined Caleb Voss and helped hunt Jonathan, but Jonathan discovered the betrayal before it was too late. He knew Samuel would come after you, Rebecca explained. So he separated us. He sent me away and hid the truth from you. Elias looked at the mountain eagle pendant. All these years he had believed his father abandoned him. Now he understood. Jonathan had sacrificed everything. Suddenly a gunshot echoed through the tunnel. Rebecca and Elias turned. Someone was inside the mine. Caleb Voss had followed them. His voice traveled through the darkness. Elias Boone. The sound of his footsteps approached slowly. You always were your father's son. Elias raised his rifle. You killed him. Caleb appeared at the end of the tunnel holding his weapon. No, he smiled. Samuel Carter killed him. Elias stared at him. Where is Samuel now? Caleb's smile became wider. Closer than you think. The words created a terrible silence. Then another voice echoed from behind Elias, a voice he had not heard in 20 years. He's right. Elias slowly turned. Standing at the entrance of the chamber was an older man wearing a dark coat. His hair was gray, his face had changed. But Elias knew him immediately. Samuel Carter, the man who had raised him. The man who had betrayed his father. The man Elias believed was his family. Samuel looked at him calmly. I was hoping you would never find this place. The mountain shook again. 3 enemies, 1 hidden truth, and a family secret that was finally coming into the light. The underground chamber became completely silent. Elias Boone stood between 2 men who had shaped his entire life in different ways. One was Caleb Voss, the enemy who had openly hunted him. The other was Samuel Carter, the man who had once protected him, the man who had taught him how to survive, the man he had trusted more than anyone after his father's death. For a moment, Elias could not speak. His mind was filled with memories. Samuel teaching him how to hold a hammer. Samuel laughing beside the old forge. Samuel telling him that family was not always about blood. All those memories now felt like lies. Why? Elias finally asked. His voice was quiet, but the pain behind it was impossible to hide. Samuel looked at him without emotion. You wouldn't understand. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. Try me. The old man slowly walked deeper into the chamber. I spent my entire life watching powerful men take everything they wanted. Your father was different. He believed honesty could defeat greed. Samuel looked toward the documents. But honesty doesn't feed a family. It doesn't create power. Rebecca stepped forward angrily. You betrayed Jonathan for money. Samuel looked at her. No, I betrayed him because he was willing to destroy everything we built. Elias stared at him. We? Samuel smiled slightly. You were young, Elias. You never knew what your father was really involved in. The words angered him.
My father was trying to protect people.
Samuel shook his head. Your father was chasing a dream. He pointed toward the documents. Those papers could have made us rich. They could have given us control over every company and every official connected to the frontier. Elias finally understood. Samuel did not see the evidence as justice. He saw it as a weapon. You never cared about my father. Samuel's expression changed slightly. I cared about him. A pause. But I cared more about what he discovered. Suddenly, another collapse shook the tunnel. Rocks fell between the groups, separating them for a moment. Rebecca grabbed Elias's arm. We need to leave now. But Elias did not move. He looked directly at Samuel. You let me believe my father abandoned me. Samuel looked away. That was necessary. Necessary? Elias's voice became louder. You were the only person I trusted. The words echoed through the chamber. For the first time, Samuel's expression showed regret, but it disappeared quickly. You survived because of my decision. No, Elias replied. I survived despite it. The tension between them grew heavier than the falling rocks around them. Then Caleb Voss interrupted. Enough. Everyone turned toward him. Caleb stepped closer. We came here for one reason. He looked at the mountain eagle symbol. Give me the key. Elias looked down at the pendant. The key? Caleb smiled. Your father was clever. The documents are useless without the final piece. Rebecca's face changed. She knew what he meant. The mountain eagle, the symbol Elias carried. Caleb raised his weapon. Hand it over, Elias. But before anyone could move, the entire chamber began collapsing. The mountain was breaking apart, and now Elias had to choose. Save the secret, or save the people who had betrayed him. The mountain roared like a living creature. The ground beneath Elias Boone's feet began to crack as massive pieces of stone fell from the ceiling. Dust filled the underground chamber, making it difficult to see. The hidden room that had protected Jonathan Boone's secret for decades was now becoming a grave. Caleb Voss stood on one side. Samuel Carter stood on the other. And between them was Elias, the man who had spent his entire life believing he knew who his enemies were. Now he discovered that the truth was far more painful. His enemies were not just strangers. Some of them had called him family. Another explosion shook the chamber. Rebecca grabbed Elias's arm. We have to leave. But Elias looked at the iron box containing his father's documents, the evidence Jonathan Boone had died protecting. If he left it behind, Caleb and Samuel would eventually find a way to use it. If he stayed, they might all die. Caleb pointed his weapon toward him. The mountain is collapsing, Boone. You have no time left. Elias looked at him. You planned this. Caleb smiled. Of course. He looked around the chamber. Your father hid this place well, but he made one mistake. What mistake? Caleb stepped closer. He trusted people. The words reminded Elias of his father's final lesson. Trust was dangerous. But without trust, a person had nothing. Suddenly, Samuel moved. Everyone turned toward him. For a moment, Elias thought Samuel was attacking, but instead, Samuel pushed a large wooden support away from a falling rock, saving Rebecca from being crushed. The action surprised everyone, even Elias. Samuel looked at him. Your father was right about one thing. Elias said nothing. Samuel continued, some things are worth protecting. For the first time in 20 years, Elias saw something different in Samuel's eyes. Not greed, not pride, regret. But before anyone could say another word, Caleb fired. The bullet struck the wall beside Samuel. Enough! Caleb shouted. His patience was gone. You both spent too much time remembering the past. He pointed toward the mountain eagle pendant. Give me the key, Elias. Elias slowly removed the pendant from his neck. Everyone watched. Caleb smiled. But Elias did not hand it over. Instead, he threw the pendant toward Rebecca. She caught it. Caleb's expression changed. You made the wrong choice. Elias raised his rifle. No. He looked at Rebecca. I made the right one. Rebecca quickly examined the pendant and noticed something. The mountain eagle was not just a symbol. The back had a hidden mechanism. She pressed a small piece of metal. A tiny compartment opened. Inside was a rolled piece of paper. A final message from Jonathan Boone. Everyone froze. Even Caleb. Elias opened the paper. His father's handwriting appeared again. My son, if you have found this message, then you have learned the hardest truth. Elias continued reading. Power does not belong to those who control secrets. It belongs to those who choose what is right when nobody is watching. The words struck Elias deeply. Then he reached the final line. Do not search for the treasure hidden beneath the mountain. A pause. The real treasure was never gold. Elias looked up. The chamber shook violently. Caleb stepped forward. What does it say? Elias folded the message. It says you were searching for the wrong thing. At that moment, the floor beneath them collapsed. A hidden passage opened beneath the chamber, and from the darkness below came the sound of rushing water. The mountain had revealed another secret, a secret even Jonathan Boone had never told anyone. The ground disappeared beneath their feet. For a terrifying moment, Elias Boone felt as if the entire mountain was swallowing them alive. The wooden floor of the chamber collapsed, revealing a hidden passage beneath the old mine. Cold water rushed through the darkness below, carrying broken pieces of rock and forgotten pieces of history with it. Elias grabbed the edge of the stone floor just before falling. Rebecca reached for his hand. Hold on! With her help, Elias pulled himself back onto solid ground. Behind them, Samuel and Caleb had also survived the collapse. But the chamber they had entered was gone. The iron box containing Jonathan Boone's documents had fallen into the darkness below. Caleb stared into the hole. No. For the first time, Elias saw true fear on his enemy's face. Not anger, not confidence. Fear, because Caleb knew something. The secret had not been destroyed. It had only moved deeper into the mountain. Rebecca looked at the hidden passage. Your father knew about this place. Elias looked at her. How? She pointed toward the walls. Carved into the stone were the same mountain eagle symbols. But there was something different. These markings were much older. Older than Jonathan. Older than the mining station itself. This place was here before the mine, Rebecca whispered. Daniel Crow, who had followed them into the chamber, examined the carvings carefully. Your father didn't discover this tunnel. He looked at Elias. He discovered what it was hiding. The group moved carefully into the passage. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Water flowed beneath their feet, and the walls were covered with strange markings. Some looked like maps, while others appeared to be messages left by people who had entered this place long ago. Elias held the lantern higher. Then he noticed something carved into the wall. A name, Jonathan Boone. His father had been here, but beneath Jonathan's name were several others. People who had entered the mountain before him, and many of them had never returned. Suddenly, Samuel stopped walking. Everyone turned. He was staring at one of the carvings. What is it? Elias asked. Samuel looked disturbed. I know this symbol. Rebecca stepped closer. From where? Samuel remained silent. Elias noticed the fear on his face. After everything Samuel had done, this was the first time Elias saw him truly afraid. Samuel, Elias said, what do you know? The old man looked at the ancient symbol. My father told me stories about this place. A pause. He said the mountain was not hiding treasure. Elias waited. Samuel continued. It was hiding a warning. Before anyone could ask another question, a sound echoed from deeper inside the tunnel. Footsteps. Slow, heavy. Someone else was down there. Someone who had been living beneath the mountain. The lantern flames moved as a cold wind passed through the tunnel. Then a voice came from the darkness. Jonathan Boone was foolish to trust his son. Elias raised his rifle. A figure stepped forward. An old man with a long grey beard emerged from the shadows. Everyone stared, because they all recognized him. He was supposed to be dead. He was the last person anyone expected to find. The man looked directly at Elias. I have been waiting for you for 20 years. And then he spoke the words that changed everything. I know who really killed your father. The underground passage became completely silent. The old man stood before them, holding a wooden walking stick in one hand and a small lantern in the other. His clothes were worn. His face was covered with years of hardship, but his eyes carried the sharpness of someone who had witnessed things no person should ever see. Elias Boone kept his rifle aimed. Who are you? The old man looked at him for a long moment. "My name is Henry Wallace." The name meant nothing to Elias, but Daniel Crow suddenly stepped forward. "Henry?" The old man looked at Daniel. "So you survived too." The two men stared at each other with a mixture of surprise and sadness. Elias noticed. "You know him?" Daniel slowly nodded. "Henry was one of the original miners who discovered this place." Henry looked toward the ancient walls. "Not just a miner. He touched one of the symbols carved into the stone. I was there the night everything changed." Elias lowered his rifle slightly. "You know what happened to my father?" Henry looked at him. "I know what happened before he died." The words made Elias tense. "Tell me." Henry walked toward the hidden chamber deeper inside the mountain. "Your father came here because he discovered the Black Mountain Company's true plan." The group followed him carefully. Henry explained that the company was never interested in gold or wealth alone. They wanted control over the entire region. They used illegal deals, threats, and violence to remove anyone who stood in their way. Jonathan Boone discovered records proving everything. But the evidence was hidden because someone inside the company betrayed him. "Caleb Voss," Elias said. Henry shook his head. "No." Everyone stopped. The old man looked directly at Elias. Caleb was only a soldier. A cold feeling passed through Elias. "Then who?" Henry's eyes moved toward Samuel Carter. The tunnel became silent. Samuel looked away. Elias slowly turned toward him. "No," Henry continued. "The man who gave Jonathan's location to Caleb was the person closest to him." Samuel closed his eyes. The truth was already written on his face. Rebecca looked shocked. "Samuel?" Henry nodded. But he did not act alone. Elias felt his heart sink. "Who else?" Henry looked at the old documents in Elias's hand. "Your father discovered that the Black Mountain Company had a leader, hidden among the most respected people in Frost Creek." A pause. "Someone nobody would ever suspect." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the tunnel. The mountain shifted again. Everyone looked upward. The passage was becoming unstable. Henry pointed toward a hidden door ahead. "Your father left one final message inside." Elias approached the stone door. "How do we open it?" Henry looked at the mountain eagle pendant. "Only a Boone can." Elias placed the pendant into a small opening in the door. The ancient mechanism moved. Stone gears turned beneath the mountain. The door slowly opened. Inside was a small room untouched by time. In the center was a wooden table. On it lay a single journal. But this journal was not written by Jonathan Boone. The name on the cover made Elias freeze. Samuel Carter. Everyone turned toward the old man, because the journal belonged to the man standing beside them. And inside, it was the proof of the greatest betrayal in Frost Creek's history. The hidden room beneath the mountain was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the old journal, resting on the wooden table. The cover was damaged by time, but the name written across it was clear. Samuel Carter. Elias Boone stared at the journal. The man standing beside him had been his protector, his teacher, and the closest thing he had to family after his father's death. But now his own words were hidden inside a book that could reveal everything. Samuel slowly stepped forward. That journal should have stayed buried. Elias looked at him.
"Why?"
Samuel did not answer. For the first time, he looked like a man who had lost control of his own story. Rebecca moved closer to the table. "Open it!" Samuel looked at her. "You don't understand what is inside." Rebecca's expression hardened. "After 20 years of lies, I think we deserve to know." Elias picked up the journal. The leather cover felt heavy in his hands, not because of its weight, because of the truth it carried. He opened the first page. The handwriting belonged to Samuel. The first entry was dated 20 years earlier. "I have made my choice." Elias continued reading. "Jonathan believes exposing the Black Mountain Company will save innocent people. But he does not understand the world we live in. The powerful always win. The weak only survive by joining them." Elias stopped. His eyes moved toward Samuel. "You wrote this?" Samuel remained silent. The next pages revealed everything. Samuel had discovered Jonathan's investigation months before anyone else. He learned about the hidden documents and the underground chamber. At first, he helped Jonathan, But slowly, greed changed him. The Black Mountain Company promised Samuel wealth, influence, and protection. In exchange, he only had to reveal Jonathan's location. One piece of information, one betrayal, and a friendship that had lasted decades was destroyed. Elias turned another page. Then he found something unexpected. A message from Samuel written after Jonathan's death. "I thought I had won. But every night I see Jonathan's face. I hear his voice asking why I chose power over friendship." Elias looked confused. Samuel had betrayed his father, but he had also lived with regret. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elias asked. Samuel looked down. "Because I was ashamed." Elias shook his head. "Shame didn't stop you from lying." Samuel accepted the words without defending himself. Suddenly, a loud gunshot echoed through the tunnel. Everyone turned. The bullet struck the wooden table. Caleb Voss stood at the entrance. "You all waste too much time with old memories." The mountain chamber became silent after Elias threw the pendant into the darkness. For a moment, nobody moved. Not Caleb Voss, not Samuel Carter, not even Rebecca. Everyone had believed the mountain eagle pendant was the key to unlocking the final secret hidden by Jonathan Boone. But Elias had just thrown it away. Caleb's face slowly changed from confidence to anger. "What did you do?" Elias looked at him calmly. "I stopped you from finding what you were looking for." Caleb stepped forward. "You think this is a game?" He pointed his weapon at Elias. "Your father spent years protecting that pendant. Without it, we cannot open the final chamber." Elias looked at the ancient walls around them. "You're wrong." Caleb stopped. Elias continued. "My father never trusted objects. He trusted people." Samuel looked at him with surprise. "What are you saying?" Elias walked toward the wooden table where the old journals rested. The pendant was never the key. He opened Jonathan Boone's letter again. The words he had read earlier suddenly made sense. Power does not belong to those who control secrets. It belongs to those who choose what is right when nobody is watching. Elias looked at the group. "The key was never something you could hold." Rebecca understood first. "The choice." Elias nodded. "Exactly. Jonathan had created a test. Anyone searching for wealth or power would chase the symbol, but someone who truly understood him would look deeper." Caleb became furious. "Enough of these riddles." He moved toward Elias. "You are just like your father, always believing that morals can defeat reality." Before Caleb could reach him, Samuel stepped forward. For the first time in 20 years, he stood against the man he once helped. "He's right, Caleb." Everyone looked at Samuel. Caleb laughed. "You?" Samuel looked at him. "I spent my life chasing power, and all it gave me was regret." Caleb raised his weapon. "You are nothing without us." Samuel shook his head. "No." He looked at Elias. "I was nothing because I forgot who I was." Suddenly, a small sound echoed through the chamber. Click. Everyone turned. The old wooden table had moved. Behind it was a hidden mechanism carved into the stone floor. Elias had noticed a small mark beneath Jonathan's journal, a mark shaped like a hand. Not a symbol. A fingerprint. A reminder that the final key was not an object. It was a person. Elias placed his hand on the stone. The mountain responded. Deep underground, ancient gears began moving. A hidden door slowly opened behind the chamber wall. Cold air rushed from inside. Caleb stared in disbelief. No, because he realized the truth. Jonathan Boone had designed everything to keep the secret away from people like him. Inside the hidden room was not gold, not weapons, not treasure. Only a large collection of documents and one final message. Elias entered first. The message was written on a wooden board. "My son, if you have reached this place, then you understand what I wanted you to learn." Elias read the words carefully. "The greatest danger is not the enemy who stands before you." A pause. "It is the person who convinces you that you must become like them to survive." Elias looked back at Samuel. The words hurt him because they were true. Then another discovery caught his attention. Among the documents was a map showing every secret operation of the Black Mountain Company. But one location was circled in red. Frost Creek. The enemy was not hiding in the mountains. It was already inside the town. The hidden chamber beneath the mountain had become a battlefield of secrets. The sound of collapsing rocks filled the air as Elias Boone stood facing Caleb Voss. Around them were the pieces of a mystery that had controlled their lives for 20 years. But now the truth was finally coming out. Caleb held the small metal key in his hand. He smiled with satisfaction. "Your father spent years protecting this." He looked at Elias. "And now it belongs to me." Elias remained calm. "You still don't understand." Caleb frowned. "Understand what?" Elias looked toward the ancient wall behind him. "My father never trusted objects." A silence followed. "He trusted people." Caleb laughed. "People betrayed him." The words were painful because they were true. Samuel lowered his eyes, but Elias continued. "Yes, some did." He looked at Samuel. "But some spent their entire lives trying to fix their mistakes." Samuel looked surprised. For the first time, Elias was not looking at him only as a traitor. He was looking at him as a broken man who had made a terrible choice. Daniel moved toward the wall covered with symbols. Jonathan knew this would happen. Everyone looked at him. He knew someone would eventually find this place. He knew they would fight over the key. Daniel touched one of the carvings. But he also knew the wrong person would never understand the final message. He pressed a hidden mark. The stone wall slowly moved. Behind it was a small chamber. Inside was a wooden box. Not an iron box. Not a treasure chest. Just a simple wooden box. Elias walked toward it. He knew immediately. This was something his father had left for him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single letter. "My son Elias." His hands became still. The words were written by Jonathan. "If you have reached this place, then you have discovered the truth about our family, our enemies, and the people who failed us." Elias continued reading. "But remember this, a man's past does not decide his future. His choices do." The words touched something deep inside him. Jonathan knew Elias would discover Samuel's betrayal. He knew Elias would feel anger. But he wanted his son to understand something important. Do not become like the men who hurt us. Do not allow anger to control your heart. Elias lowered the letter for a moment. Outside the chamber, the mountain continued shaking, but inside everything felt still. Then he reached the final lines. "The greatest treasure beneath this mountain is not the evidence, the money or the power people seek." A pause. "The greatest treasure is the truth, and truth only matters when someone is brave enough to protect it." Elias closed his eyes. For the first time in 20 years, he felt close to his father again. Suddenly, Caleb grabbed the documents and moved toward the exit. "You can keep your memories." He smiled. "I will take the power." But before he could leave, Samuel stepped in front of him. Caleb stopped. "You?" Samuel looked at him. "I spent 20 years running from what I did." He raised his weapon. "I'm not running anymore." The two men faced each other. The same mountain that had witnessed betrayal was now witnessing redemption. But Caleb was not ready to surrender. He fired. The shot echoed through the chamber. And as the smoke disappeared, everyone looked to see who had fallen. The journey back to Frost Creek was filled with silence. Elias Boone rode through the frozen mountains with Rebecca, Daniel, Samuel, and the documents that could destroy the Black Mountain Company forever. But the discovery beneath the mountain had changed everything. The enemy was not hiding far away. The enemy was already living among them. For years, Elias had believed Frost Creek was just a small frontier town where people struggled to survive, against harsh winters and dangerous roads. Now he knew there was another story beneath the surface. A story of power, a story of betrayal, a story written in fear. As they approached the town, Elias noticed something strange. The streets were unusually quiet. People who normally gathered outside the shops had disappeared indoors. Windows closed, doors locked. The entire town felt like it was waiting for something terrible to happen. Rebecca looked around carefully. "They know we are coming." Elias nodded. They were always watching. When they reached the center of Frost Creek, they saw a crowd gathered near the old courthouse. At the front stood the town's most respected man, Mayor William Harrington, a wealthy businessman who had helped build Frost Creek, a man everyone trusted. But when Elias saw his face, he remembered the map from the hidden chamber. the red circle, Frost Creek, and one name written beside it, William Harrington. The mayor smiled as Elias approached. "Welcome home, Elias." The words sounded friendly, but Elias heard the threat hidden behind them. "You knew," Elias said. The crowd became silent. Mayor Harrington looked confused. Knew what? Elias pulled out one of the documents. Everything. The mayor's expression changed for only a second, but Elias noticed a person could hide lies with words, but not with their eyes. "You have no idea what you are dealing with," Harrington said quietly. Elias stepped closer. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." He looked around at the people of Frost Creek. The men who disappeared, the accidents, the missing workers, my father's death. The crowd began whispering. Harrington tried to control the situation. "This man is spreading dangerous lies." But then someone stepped forward, an old shopkeeper. "I remember Jonathan Boone." Everyone turned. The old man removed his hat.
"He told me something was wrong years ago."
Another person stepped forward, then another. Slowly, the people of Frost Creek began remembering the secrets they had ignored, the questions they were afraid to ask. Harrington realized he was losing control. Then a gunshot suddenly echoed through the street. The crowd screamed. Everyone turned toward the sound. A man on a rooftop aimed his weapon at Elias. Caleb Voss. He had survived the mountain, and he was not alone. Behind him stood several armed men wearing the symbol of the Black Mountain Company. Harrington smiled. "Now you understand, Boone." The town fell silent. This was never just about your father. Elias looked at the armed men surrounding Frost Creek. Harrington continued. "This town was built on our power." Elias raised his rifle. "No." He looked at the people standing behind him. "This town was built by the people who refused to give up." For the first time, Frost Creek was ready to fight back. But before the battle began, Caleb shouted one final warning. "Elias Boone, you still don't know the biggest secret." A pause. "Your father wasn't trying to destroy the Black Mountain Company." Caleb smiled. He was trying to save someone inside it. Elias froze, because he realized the story was not over. There was still one secret left, and it was connected to his own blood. The streets of Frost Creek had become a battlefield. Snow fell heavily from the dark sky as the people of the town stood frozen, between fear and courage. For years, they had lived under the shadow of powerful men who controlled their businesses, their land and their future. But now the truth had reached them, and there was no going back. Elias Boone stood in the center of the town, facing Caleb Voss and the armed men of the Black Mountain Company. Beside him stood Rebecca, Daniel, and Samuel, 3 people connected to the secrets of his past. 3 people who had helped him uncover the truth. But Caleb's final words continued to echo in Elias's mind. "Your father was trying to save someone inside the company." Elias looked at him. "What are you talking about?" Caleb smiled. "Your father discovered the truth about the company years ago, but he also discovered something else." The crowd remained silent. Caleb slowly lowered his weapon. Someone in the Black Mountain Company was not like the others. Elias felt a strange feeling in his chest. "Who?" Caleb looked directly at Rebecca. Everyone turned. Rebecca's expression changed. Elias noticed immediately. "You know something." Rebecca looked away. "Rebecca." Her silence was enough. Elias stepped closer. "What are you hiding?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "Your father never told you everything about our family." The words shocked him. Not again. After all the secrets, after all the lies, Elias had reached the point where another hidden truth felt impossible to accept. Rebecca looked at him sadly. "When Jonathan sent me away, he wasn't only trying to protect me." She looked toward the courthouse. He was trying to protect someone else. "Who?" Rebecca hesitated. Then she spoke. "Our mother." Elias froze. "Our mother died years ago." Rebecca shook her head. "No." The world seemed to stop. "She survived." The words were impossible. Elias remembered the day he was told his mother had died. He remembered the sadness in his father's eyes. But what if that had also been a lie? Rebecca continued. "Your mother discovered the Black Mountain Company before Jonathan did. She found out that powerful men were using the company to control the entire region. Elias stared at her. Then why did everyone say she was dead? Because that was the only way to keep her alive. A sudden movement came from the crowd. An elderly woman stepped forward. Her face was covered by a dark hood. Everyone watched as she slowly removed it. Elias stopped breathing. The woman looked at him with tears in her eyes. "My son." The word traveled through the silent street. Elias felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. For 20 years, he believed he had lost his entire family. But now, standing before him, was the person he had mourned his entire life, his mother. Behind Caleb, even the armed men looked uncertain, because this was not part of their plan. Caleb's expression changed. He knew something had gone wrong. Elias slowly stepped forward. "Mother?" The woman nodded. "I wanted to return to you." Her voice trembled. "But your father made me promise to stay hidden until the truth was safe." Elias looked at the people around him. Everything he believed about his past was changing again. Then his mother whispered, "Your father did not die because he found the secret." A pause. "He died because he discovered who was trying to kill me." Elias turned toward Caleb, and for the first time, Caleb Voss looked afraid. The entire town of Frost Creek stood frozen, not because of the winter cold, because of the impossible truth standing before them. Elias Boone stared at the woman who had just called him her son. For 20 years, he had carried the pain of losing his family. He had accepted loneliness as his fate. He had built walls around his heart because he believed everyone he loved was gone. But now those walls were beginning to break. His mother was alive, and she had been hiding all these years. Elias slowly walked toward her. His voice was barely a whisper.
"Why?"
The woman looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Because your father asked me to." Elias stopped. "My father?" She nodded. "Jonathan knew the Black Mountain Company would never stop searching for us. He knew they would use you to reach me." The words hurt. Elias looked away. "So he let me believe you were dead?" His mother lowered her eyes. "I know it was cruel." A pause. "But your father believed a painful lie was better than a certain death." The crowd remained silent. Even the people of Frost Creek were listening. His mother continued, "The night everyone thought I died was the same night. Jonathan discovered the truth about the company." Elias remembered the old stories. The fire, the accident, the disappearance. But the real story was different. "There was no accident," his mother said. "That night, Caleb Voss and his men came to our home." Elias looked at Caleb. The scarred man stood silently. For the first time, he had no words. "They wanted the documents your father had discovered. They wanted the names of everyone involved." His mother looked toward Samuel. "And Samuel knew about it." Samuel closed his eyes. The pain on his face showed that he could not deny it. "I made a mistake," Samuel whispered. Elias looked at him. "A mistake?" Samuel looked down. "I thought I could control them. I thought I could work with them and protect everyone." His voice broke. "But I was wrong." Caleb laughed from behind his men. "Enough with the emotional stories." Everyone turned toward him. He raised his weapon. "The past does not matter." He looked at Elias. "Only power matters." But this time Elias saw something different. Caleb was not confident. He was desperate, because the truth had escaped. The people of Frost Creek knew. The evidence existed, and the Black Mountain Company was losing control. Suddenly Daniel Crow stepped forward. "You are finished, Caleb." Caleb smiled. "You think a few documents will destroy us?" Daniel looked toward the courthouse. "No." He pointed at the crowd. "The truth will." The people around them began moving closer. Farmers, workers, families who had suffered under the company's control. For years they had been afraid, but fear was changing into anger. Caleb looked around and realized something. He was no longer controlling the town. The town was standing against him. Then suddenly a rider appeared at the edge of Frost Creek. The man jumped from his horse and ran toward them. "Elias." Everyone turned. The rider held a sealed envelope. "I found this in the old Boone property." Elias took the envelope. The handwriting on the front made his heart stop. Jonathan Boone. Another letter, another secret. His father's final message. Elias opened it slowly. The first line read, "My son, if you are reading this, then the final truth has been revealed." Elias continued reading, and the next sentence changed everything. Caleb Voss was never the leader of the Black Mountain Company. A cold silence spread across Frost Creek, because the real person behind everything was someone nobody expected. The letter trembled in Elias Boone's hands. The streets of Frost Creek had gone completely silent. Everyone waited. Everyone wanted to know the truth hidden inside Jonathan Boone's final message. Elias looked at the old handwriting of his father, the man who had sacrificed everything, the man who had spent his final days protecting his family from a darkness that reached far beyond the mountains. He continued reading. "My son, if Caleb Voss stands before you, remember this. He is not the mind behind the evil that has followed our family." Elias looked up at Caleb. For the first time, the scarred man looked nervous. The letter continued. "Caleb is only a weapon used by someone far more dangerous." Elias turned the page. The next words made his heart stop. "The person controlling the Black Mountain Company is someone who has always stood close to power." The crowd began whispering. Everyone looked around. Who could it be? A stranger? A hidden enemy? Or someone they trusted? Then Elias reached the final part of the message. "The truth is hidden in Frost Creek itself." He lowered the letter slowly. The town became uneasy. Mayor William Harrington stood near the courthouse, watching silently. Elias looked at him. The mayor's expression changed, only for a second, but it was enough. "You," the word escaped Elias's mouth. The crowd turned. Harrington forced a laugh. "Are you accusing me?" Elias stepped forward. "My father discovered the company's crimes. He discovered who was giving orders." He held up the letter. "And that person was inside this town." Harrington shook his head. "This is madness." But Daniel Crow stepped forward. "No." Everyone looked at him. "Jonathan suspected you years ago." The mayor's face became serious. Daniel continued. "You were the one approving land deals. You were the one controlling the workers. You were the one who made sure nobody investigated the disappearances." The people of Frost Creek began remembering the unfair decisions, the missing workers, the families who lost everything. Harrington's friendly image began to disappear. "You have no proof," he said. Elias reached into his coat and removed one of the documents from the mountain chamber. "Actually, we do." The paper contained names, payments, orders, and at the top was William Harrington's signature. The crowd reacted immediately. The mayor looked around. He realized the town no longer feared him. "You think this changes anything?" Harrington said coldly. "It was an entire system built on fear." But Jonathan Boone had known this, and he had left one final weapon behind. Not a gun, not gold, not money. The truth. Suddenly a sound came from behind Harrington. A gunshot. Everyone turned. Caleb Voss had lowered his weapon, and he was aiming at Harrington, because even the man who had spent 20 years serving darkness had finally realized who the real enemy was. His voice was no longer kind. "You people think truth makes you powerful?" He looked at Elias. "Your father believed the same thing." Elias raised his rifle, and he was right. Harrington smiled. Then he slowly reached inside his coat. Everyone prepared for a weapon, but instead he pulled out a small black notebook. A notebook filled with names. "Do you really think I worked alone?" The question created silence. Harrington opened the notebook. "Every powerful person in this region is connected." He looked at the crowd. Judges, businessmen, officials. His smile returned. "You destroy me and half the frontier falls with me." Elias stared at him, because he finally understood. The Black Mountain Company was not just a group of criminals. The gunshot echoed through the streets of Frost Creek. For a moment, everyone stood frozen. Snow continued falling from the dark sky as Caleb Voss stood with his weapon raised. But he was not aiming at Elias. He was aiming at William Harrington. The mayor looked shocked. "Caleb." His voice carried anger and disbelief. "You would betray me." Caleb stared at him. "Betray you?" A bitter smile appeared on his face. "You betrayed everyone." The people of Frost Creek watched in silence. For years, Caleb Voss had been seen as the monster who hunted their families. destroyed lives and followed orders without mercy. But now they saw something different, a broken man who finally understood the truth. Harrington laughed. "You think you can become a hero now?" Caleb lowered his weapon slightly. "No," his voice was quiet. "I know I don't deserve that." He looked toward Elias. "But I am tired of being your weapon." Elias watched carefully. He remembered all the pain Caleb had caused, the fear, the threats, the years of suffering. But he also understood something. The truth had changed everyone, even the people who had done terrible things. Harrington stepped backward. "You are all fools." He looked around at the crowd. "You think exposing me ends this?" He opened the black notebook again. "You don't understand how deep this goes." Daniel moved closer. "Maybe." He looked at the people of Frost Creek. "But every empire built on lies eventually falls." Harrington suddenly pulled a hidden weapon from his coat. Everything happened quickly. He aimed toward Elias. But before he could fire, Samuel Carter moved. The old man stepped between them. The shot rang out. Samuel fell into the snow. "Elias!" Rebecca rushed forward. Elias dropped beside Samuel. For a moment the entire world disappeared. The man who had betrayed his father, the man who had caused so much pain, had just saved his life. Samuel looked at Elias weakly. "I spent 20 years trying to forget what I did." His voice became softer. "I thought I could never fix it." Elias held his hand. "Why did you do it?" Samuel looked toward the mountains. "Because your father was the only person who ever truly believed in me." A tear moved down his face. "And I destroyed the one person who trusted me." Elias said nothing, because some wounds were too deep for words. Behind them, the people of Frost Creek moved forward. They surrounded Harrington. For the first time, the powerful man had nowhere to hide. The mayor looked around. The fear he had controlled for years was gone. The people were no longer afraid. Harrington was arrested, and the documents from Jonathan Boone's hidden chamber were sent across the frontier. Names were revealed, crimes were exposed. The Black Mountain Company began collapsing. But the story of Elias Boone was not about revenge. It was about choosing what kind of person to become after losing everything. Weeks later, the winter slowly began to fade. The snow melted from the mountains. The old Blacksmith forge in Frost Creek opened again. But this time, Elias was not alone. Thomas helped him carry tools. Rebecca worked beside her brother. His mother finally lived without hiding. And every morning, the sound of Elias's hammer once again echoed through the valley. But now, it was not the sound of a lonely man. It was the sound of a family rebuilding their lives. Yet one question remained. Deep beneath the mountains, another secret was still waiting. A secret Jonathan Boone had never revealed. And years later, someone would return to search for it. Spring finally arrived in Frost Creek. The endless winter of 1884 had become a memory, but the people of the town would never forget the events that changed their lives forever. The mountains that once represented fear and danger now stood quietly beneath the warm sunlight. Snow disappeared from the valleys. Rivers began flowing again, and the frozen trails that had separated people for months slowly became paths of hope. At the center of it all stood Elias Boone's Blacksmith forge, the same forge where he had spent years working alone, the same place where his silence had become a legend. But everything had changed. The sound of his hammer no longer echoed through an empty valley. It echoed through a home. Thomas spent his days learning the blacksmith trade from Elias, the young boy who had arrived during the terrible snowstorm as a frightened child, was now growing stronger every day. "You hold the hammer like your father did," Elias told him one morning. Thomas smiled. "You mean like you?" Elias looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yes." For the first time in many years, Elias allowed himself to speak about his past without pain. Rebecca stayed in Frost Creek with her brother. Together they rebuilt the connection that had been stolen from them. They talked about their father. They remembered their childhood. And they slowly healed the wounds created by years of separation. Elias's mother also found peace. She no longer had to hide in the shadows. The woman who had spent decades running from danger could finally watch her. Children lived the lives Jonathan Boone wanted for them. But not everything was forgotten. The documents discovered beneath the mountain changed the frontier forever. The names of corrupt officials and criminals were revealed. Many powerful men lost their influence. The Black Mountain Company disappeared. But Elias knew something important. Evil did not disappear forever. There would always be people who wanted power. There would always be people willing to sacrifice others for their own gain. That was why the truth mattered. Years later, travelers passing through Frost Creek would often hear stories about Elias Boone. Some called him the greatest blacksmith in the Rocky Mountains. Others called him the man who defeated the Black Mountain Company. But those who truly knew him remembered something different. They remembered a lonely man who opened his door during the worst storm of the winter. A man who helped strangers even when he believed he had nothing left to give. A man who discovered that family was not only about blood. It was about the people who choose to stand beside you. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Elias stood outside his forge and looked across the valley. The same mountains that had taken so much from him had also given him something unexpected. A second chance. He touched the old mountain eagle pendant that belonged to his father. For years it represented secrets, danger, and loss. Now it represented something else. Hope. Jonathan Boone's final lesson had been right. The greatest treasure was never gold. It was never power. It was never control. The greatest treasure was the courage to choose kindness. When the world gave you every reason to become bitter. And from that day forward, whenever the sound of a blacksmith hammer echoed through Frost Creek, people remembered the stranger who arrived during the storm, the family that was found after being lost, and the man who proved that even in the coldest winter, a small act of kindness could change an entire life.